They called it a quarterly update meeting. That's what showed up on my Outlook calendar anyway. Just another Wednesday morning gathering in Apex Technologies' glass conference room, complete with overpriced coffee and the usual corporate theater. I'm Ed Sullivan, 52 years old, and I've been building security systems longer than most of these people have been writing code. But that morning felt different from the moment I pulled into the parking lot. My Ford F-150 looked out of place next to all the Tesla Model 3s and BMW sedans that belonged to Brandon Whitfield's new hires. At 6:30 a.m., I was already thinking about the meeting while most of these kids were probably still hitting the snooze button. I'd been waking up at 5 a.m. for the past 3 weeks, ever since the rumors started. Not because I wanted to, but because my brain wouldn't shut off, lying there in the dark, calculating numbers, mortgage payment, $2,800. Mike's college fund, enough for 2 years at MIT, maybe 3 if I stretched it. Monthly expenses, $4,200 if I cut everything to the bone. The math never worked in my favor. Sarah used to handle the money stuff before she passed. Cancer took her 3 years ago, and I'd been flying solo ever since, trying to figure out both the dad role and the provider role without much help. Mike was 15 when we lost her, and somehow we'd muddled through together. Now he was 18, heading to MIT in the fall, and I was about to find out if all those late nights and weekend calls had been worth it. The elevator ride to the 3rd floor felt longer than usual. I'd taken this same ride every morning for 16 years, ever since Apex hired me away from Northrop Grumman. Before that, 10 years at Northrop after my 8 years in the Marines, 34 years total of building things that mattered, systems that kept people safe and contracts honest. But the moment I walked into that conference room, something felt wrong. 2 cameras were set up in the back, pointing straight at the podium. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? This was worse. Brandon Whitfield, our CEO, stood there in his expensive suit, looking like he was about to deliver the performance of his life. Brandon had been under pressure from the board for 6 months to cut costs before the merger. The 25-year-old hotshots he'd been hiring cost half my salary, and he'd convinced himself that experience was just expensive overhead. What he didn't understand was that some knowledge can't be Googled or learned from YouTube tutorials. But Brandon was the kind of CEO who thought every problem could be solved with a PowerPoint presentation and the right buzzwords. I took my usual seat in the 3rd row, same spot I'd occupied for the past 5 years since they moved me out of my basement lab. Around me, engineers and project managers shuffled in with their notepads, most of them young enough to be my kids. Hell, Mike probably knows more about their programming languages than I do these days. Kid's a natural with computers, way beyond anything I ever understood. But they don't know what I know about keeping systems secure. When you've spent 8 years in the Marines learning that attention to detail can mean the difference between coming home and not, you carry that with you. The room filled up with the usual suspects. Jennifer from accounting, looking nervous and avoiding eye contact. The new hotshots from Stanford and Carnegie Mellon that Brandon had been hiring at twice my salary. Tony Rodriguez, our head of security, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a slight nod. Ex-Army, served 2 tours in Afghanistan. We'd never talked much about our service, but there's an understanding between guys who've been there. Brandon cleared his throat, and the room went quiet. After careful consideration, he began, his voice carrying that practiced corporate tone. We've determined that Edward Sullivan is no longer aligned with Apex's future direction. It took a second for my name to register. The coffee in my stomach turned to acid. He wasn't looking at me. He was performing for the cameras, for the board members watching the live stream, for the investors who'd been breathing down his neck about the upcoming $1.1 billion merger with Pinnacle Defense Solutions. 34 years of work. 8 years serving my country, then 10 years at Northrop building systems for defense contracts worth hundreds of millions. Then 16 years at Apex. Late nights, weekend calls, and systems that never failed on my watch. Reduced to one sentence delivered into a microphone for public consumption. You know what really gets me? I'd seen this coming. The writing was on the wall when they started hiring all these 25-year-old hotshots with their computer science degrees and their talk about agile methodology and disruptive innovation. They looked at guys like me and saw dead weight. Someone drawing a salary who might remember when things were done differently, when a handshake meant something, when you honored the people who'd built the foundation you were standing on. I sat there, back straight, keeping my face neutral. Military training kicks in when you need it most. Around me, a few people started that awkward courtesy clapping you do when you're not sure what's appropriate. Others stared at their shoes, uncomfortable with the spectacle. Jennifer from accounting was actually crying, which surprised me. We'd worked together on budget reviews for 8 years, but I didn't think she cared that much. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. Not in front of these cameras, not in front of people who'd pretended to be colleagues while Brandon planned this little show. Here's what Brandon and his executive team didn't understand about the system I'd built for them. It wasn't just some standard corporate security setup you could replace with an off-the-shelf solution. Over the past 15 years, I'd designed a 4-layer verification framework that protected every major contract Apex signed. Layer 1 handled basic authentication, usernames, passwords, the basic stuff any IT department could manage. Layer 2 managed legal compliance, making sure every signature was from someone authorized to sign and that all regulatory requirements were met. Layer 3 verified financial authorization, checking that the dollar amounts matched approved budgets and that payment structures complied with federal contracting guidelines. Layer 4, my personal edition, was an advanced digital signature system that only I could authorize. Think of it like a bank vault with 4 different locks, and I held the master key to the most important one. Every major contract needed my personal authorization code, which I'd change regularly and never wrote down anywhere. Without that code, the whole system would lock down until I cleared it personally. I'd learned this approach during my years with Northrop Grumman, working on defense contracts where one mistake could cost millions or compromise national security. When Apex started landing government deals worth $800 million annually, I made sure we had the same level of protection. The Pentagon doesn't mess around with contractors who can't secure their paperwork. Every contract, every merger document, every major agreement had to pass through all 4 layers. Remove any layer and the whole system would lock down until the issue was resolved. It was like a digital safe with 4 different locks, and I held the master key to the most important one. Brandon had no idea he'd just fired the one person who could complete his precious merger. The irony was beautiful in its simplicity. He'd gotten rid of the old guy who was supposedly holding back progress, not realizing that progress literally couldn't happen without me. After the meeting, I walked to my desk like I was just grabbing lunch. My workspace looked exactly the same. Organized, methodical, everything in its place. The same coffee-stained mouse pad I'd been using for 8 years. The same photo of my Ford F-150 from the company parking lot picnic. And on the corner sat a photo of Mike at his high school graduation, holding up his acceptance letter to MIT. Kid's brilliant with computers, way beyond anything I ever understood. Takes after his mother in the brains department. The photo reminded me why I'd worked so hard, why every late night and weekend call had been worth it. Sarah always said Mike would do something important with his life. She'd be proud to see him heading to MIT, even if she couldn't be there to watch him walk across that stage. Tony Rodriguez appeared beside my desk. He's a good guy, someone I'd personally recommended for the job 8 years ago when he was just a young father trying to provide for his family. Ex-Army, served 2 tours in Afghanistan before getting into corporate security. Now he had the uncomfortable job of escorting me out. "Ed, I'm sorry," he said, quietly, his voice barely audible. "This isn't right. They're making a huge mistake." I nodded, starting to pack up my personal items. "Just do your job, Tony. You've got a family to think about. Mortgage payments don't care about principals." "You know what this means, right?" he asked, glancing around to make sure nobody was listening. "The merger documents. They're going to hit your security protocols. I know exactly what it means." Tony helped me load my box with the few personal items I kept at work. A coffee mug Mike had made in middle school pottery class. The photo of Sarah from our last vacation before she got sick. A small American flag from my Marine unit. 20 years from now, they're going to realize what they just did, Tony said. You built something they can't replace. We walked toward the exit together, past colleagues who suddenly found their keyboards fascinating. A few met my eyes with apologetic looks, but most avoided eye contact entirely. Jennifer from accounting was still sniffling at her desk. The sound of my footsteps echoed in the too quiet office. At my age, you realize how few real friends you have at work. Most relationships are just convenience, people being polite because they have to see you every day. But Tony was different. Military guys stick together, even when the corporate world tries to divide us. At the glass doors, Tony paused before scanning his badge. "They don't deserve what you built for them," he said. "Take care of yourself, Tony," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "And if anyone asks you about the system, you tell them exactly how it works. Don't let them blame you when it all falls apart." The doors opened with their familiar mechanical hiss. Cool air rushed in from the parking lot, carrying the smell of car exhaust and the promise of a life I hadn't planned for. I stepped through without looking back. What I carried with me was heavier than any briefcase, the knowledge that Apex's entire merger depended on systems I'd built, layer by careful layer. That evening, I sat in my kitchen, the familiar quiet settling around me like an old jacket. 3 days after the firing, I finally told Mike what had happened. We were eating dinner when I just came out with it. "Son, I need to tell you something. I lost my job at Apex this week." Mike put down his fork and looked at me. "Dad, I know. Jennifer from your accounting department called Mom's sister. Word gets around." "I didn't want you to worry about college costs." "Dad," he interrupted, "if you need me to defer a year in work, I'll do it. You taught me that family comes first. Besides, any company stupid enough to fire you doesn't deserve what you built for them." That's when I knew Sarah had raised our boy right. He had AP exams coming up, college orientation to worry about. He didn't need to know that his dad's carefully planned financial strategy had just gone up in smoke. At 52, getting fired isn't like being 30 and bouncing back. Companies see your resume and think liability, health insurance costs, training someone who might retire in 15 years, dealing with a guy who remembers when things were done differently. I'd seen it happen to other guys my age. They'd put on their best suits and shake hands and smile at interviews, and then get passed over for someone half their age who'd work for half the salary. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat by the window, watching the city move on without any awareness of what had just happened at Apex Technologies. My phone sat silent on the table. No calls, no messages, no emergency alerts from the system. But I knew it was only a matter of time. The unemployment benefits would kick in next week. $420 per week, which barely covers groceries. Thank God I'd been putting extra toward the mortgage principal for the past 5 years. Sarah had always been smart about money, taught me to pay down debt when times were good. Still, doing the math was sobering. My savings could cover about 8 months of expenses if I cut everything to the bone. After that, I'd be looking at borrowing against my 401k or selling the house. 3 days. That's how long it took for Brandon's confidence to crack. I was finishing my morning coffee, thinking about updating my LinkedIn profile and wondering if anyone would hire a 52-year-old systems engineer when my phone buzzed. Apex's executive line. Brandon himself was calling, probably from his corner office with the city view he loved to show off during board meetings. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I set the phone down and watched it vibrate against the kitchen table like an angry insect. The irony hit me. 3 days ago, he'd treated me like dead weight in front of the entire company. Now, in his panic, I was suddenly essential again. When the call finally dropped to voicemail, I waited a minute before pressing play. His voice came through the speaker, but it wasn't the commanding tone he'd used on stage. This was raw, desperate, breaking at the edges. "Ed, pick up. Please, we've got a situation here. The merger documents won't clear without your authorization code." Legal's breathing down my neck, and Pinnacle's executives are asking questions every hour. "I need you to call me back. We can work something out. Just call me." Work something out. That was Brandon's language for when the walls were closing in. He never begged until the leverage shifted completely out of his favor. I deleted the voicemail and went back to my coffee. Outside, delivery trucks rumbled past, dogs barked, and life carried on. For the first time in 34 years, corporate chaos wasn't my problem to solve. The calls kept coming. First from Brandon, then from Amanda Foster at the law firm handling the merger. Amanda and I had worked together on dozens of contracts over the years. She was sharp, professional, usually respectful. But when I finally answered her call on the second day, desperation had made her forget our history. "Ed, this is just a formality," she said, her voice strained but trying to sound casual. "We need your digital signature to finalize the documents. Nothing complicated, just routine authorization. You know how these systems work. Formality. The same word Brandon had used when he announced my firing. Just a formality," he'd said. like 34 years of service was nothing more than paperwork to be filed away. "Amanda," I said, keeping my tone level, "I know better than anyone what's at stake here. I built the framework your contracts are trapped inside. I know exactly why the system is frozen, and it's not a formality." Silence stretched between us. The kind lawyers hate. Silence that means control is slipping away from them. "Surely you understand the risk of letting this collapse," she said carefully. "The jobs at stake, the shareholders, the economic impact." I almost laughed. Where had their concern been when Brandon paraded my dismissal like a trophy? Where had it been during all those late nights when I worked alone to keep their deals from falling apart? And where was their concern about my job, my mortgage, my son's college fund? "I won't be signing anything," I said. "Not today. Not ever." "You want to talk about jobs at stake? I just lost mine after 34 years. Good luck figuring out your authorization problem." The next morning brought news that Apex's stock had dropped 18% overnight, losing over $200 million in market value. When a $1.1 billion merger suddenly hits technical difficulties, investors don't stick around to find out what that means. The financial networks were calling it a procedural delay, but smart money was already heading for the exits. The financial networks were calling it a procedural delay, but markets don't lie. When confidence falters, numbers fall. The system I'd built was speaking louder than any press release Brandon could issue. That evening, Mike came home from work looking exhausted. The computer repair shop had been slammed with back-to-school rushes, people bringing in laptops that had been sitting in closets all summer. He dropped his backpack by the door and headed straight for the refrigerator. "Dad, you're home early," he said, grabbing a Coke. "Everything okay at work?" This was my moment. I should have told him right then about the firing, about the uncertainty we were facing. But looking at his tired face, thinking about the pressure he was already under with AP exams and college prep, I couldn't do it. "Just a light day," I said. "How was the shop?" "Crazy busy. This guy brought in a laptop that was completely fried, tried to fix it himself with YouTube videos. Spent 3 hours explaining why you can't just pour rice on a motherboard." He laughed, and for a moment, everything felt normal. We ordered pizza and watched a baseball game, just like we'd done hundreds of times before. Mike talked about his computer science classes, how he was thinking about specializing in cybersecurity like his old man said he wanted to build systems that actually protected people, not just made money for shareholders. "You taught me that," he said during a commercial break. "Remember when I was like 12 and wanted to hack into the school's grade system? You didn't just tell me not to do it. You explained why it mattered, why trust was the foundation of everything." I remembered. Sarah had been going through chemo then, and Mike was acting out, testing boundaries. Instead of grounding him, I'd shown him how security systems worked, how much trust people put in the systems that protected them, how breaking that trust hurt real people, not just abstract institutions. "Your mom would be proud of you," I said. "She always knew you'd do something important. She'd be proud of you too, Dad. What you built at Apex, it's going to be your legacy." If only he knew how complicated that legacy was about to become. Then came the anonymous message. I found it in my personal email that evening, the subject line blank, sender address routed through multiple relays. The body contained one line: "They need you more than they think. The other side knows it too." AR could be Alex Rivera from IT, someone who'd always understood the technical side of what I'd built. The message was followed by another the next day. "Brandon doesn't hold the key, you do. Pinnacle Defense knows it. Check the business news." That hit me like cold water. I pulled up the financial websites on my laptop. Buried in the merger coverage was a quote from an unnamed Pinnacle executive. "Certain technical authorizations remain outstanding. We're evaluating all options." They weren't fooled by Brandon's performance. They recognized that I, not his board or his lawyers, was the real gatekeeper. The $1.1 billion merger depended on authorization that only I could provide. And I was sitting in my kitchen in sweatpants, unemployed, with no intention of helping any of them. By the end of the week, the whispers had become headlines. Apex's stock continued sliding as investors realized the routine delay was anything but routine. The merger documents remained unsigned, frozen in a system that wouldn't bend to pressure or legal maneuvering. I watched it unfold from my living room, financial news playing in the background while I sorted through job listings. At my age, most postings might as well say no one over 40 need apply. They use code words, digital native, startup mentality, high energy environment. Translation, we want someone young who'll work 80-hour weeks for peanuts. That's when Brandon made his biggest mistake. Desperate to salvage the situation, he announced that his legal team had found a technical workaround that would bypass the authorization requirements. He stood behind the same podium where he'd fired me, promising investors that full clearance would happen within 24 hours. I watched the press conference from my kitchen table, laptop open, eating a peanut butter sandwich because I was already cutting back on expenses. Brandon looked confident, even triumphant, as he assured the cameras that the merger was back on track. He had no idea what was coming. You see, when I built that system, I didn't just create verification layers. I built in something else, a learning algorithm that would recognize and flag any attempt to circumvent the authorization process. Call it professional paranoia, but after 8 years in the Marines and 26 years working defense contracts, you learn to assume someone's always trying to hack your work. The quantum encryption wasn't just a fancy lock, it was a trap. Every time someone tried to bypass the system, it learned their methods and built stronger defenses, like a digital immune system that got smarter with each attack. The next day, reports started trickling out on the financial websites. Apex's legal team had attempted to input their bypass code into the merger platform. At first, everything seemed fine. Documents loaded, systems appeared to accept the input. For a few hours, Brandon and his board probably celebrated, convinced they'd pulled off a rescue. But then the failsafe triggered. Every unauthorized signature, every false credential was detected and flagged. The system didn't just reject the attempt, it cascaded through every copy of the files, freezing them permanently and rendering all versions invalid. The entire contract in every iteration was dead. I pictured the scene. Lawyers staring at screens full of red warning messages, IT staff scrambling to understand what had gone wrong, board members watching their $1.1 billion deal evaporate in real time, and Brandon finally understanding that his performance had just crashed into an immovable wall. The stock plummeted again, erasing the brief bump and then some. News outlets that had praised his innovative solution that morning pivoted sharply by evening, highlighting the complete collapse with merciless detail. My phone started buzzing with texts from former colleagues. "Ed, did you do this?" one asked. Another, "They're saying it's a security feature you built. Is that true?" I didn't respond. Let them figure it out themselves. That evening, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. New York area code, Pinnacle Defense's headquarters. "Mr. Sullivan," the voice was calm, measured, nothing like the desperation I'd been hearing from Apex. "This is Brian Matthews, COO at Pinnacle Defense." I waited, curious to hear what the other side had to say. "I'll be direct," he continued. "The contract cannot proceed without your authorization. Our technical team has confirmed that without your signature, the entire agreement is invalid. Our board has suspended all forward activities indefinitely." The honesty was refreshing. No threats, no manipulation, just recognition of reality. "They underestimated you," Matthews said quietly. "Apex, I mean. They treated you like overhead when you're actually the cornerstone. We've been watching this situation develop, and frankly, we're impressed by the elegance of your security architecture." I found myself leaning forward. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying we recognize talent when we see it, and we recognize that Apex just made the biggest personnel mistake in corporate history. The conversation that followed changed everything." Matthews explained that Pinnacle had been evaluating not just Apex's financials, but their technical infrastructure. "You have to understand," Matthews explained, "defense contractors live and die by security clearances. Your top-secret SCI clearance, combined with your system architecture experience, makes you incredibly valuable. We have $800 million in government contracts that require someone with your exact qualifications." Apex was sitting on a gold mine and didn't even realize it. Without it, and without me, the merger made no sense. "We'd like you to come in for a formal interview process," Matthews said. "Given your security clearance and the sensitivity of our contracts, there'll be background verification and technical assessments. But I'll be direct. We're looking at a chief technology officer position, $295,000 base salary, full benefits, and equity options. The position exists because we recognize that companies like ours need people who actually understand security, not just the latest buzzwords. I sat there in my kitchen, unemployed for 2 weeks, looking at unemployment forms and job listings that basically told me I was too old to matter. And here was a $295,000 offer to do exactly what I'd been doing, except for people who appreciated it. "There's one condition," Matthews added. "We need to know that the Apex situation is permanently resolved, that there's no chance of reconciliation." I thought about Brandon's desperate phone calls, about 34 years of being taken for granted, about being fired on camera like some kind of corporate entertainment. "Mr. Matthews," I said, "that bridge isn't just burned, it's ash." 3 months later, after the SEC had been quietly investigating financial irregularities, federal agents executed search warrants at Apex's offices. My security system had been flagging suspicious transactions for over a year, payments to shell companies, backdated contracts, routing money through offshore accounts. What started as a merger collapse had uncovered systematic fraud that went back years. The same system designed to protect legitimate contracts was now exposing illegitimate ones. Agent Sarah Collins from the FBI Financial Crimes Division called me the next morning. Professional, direct, asking technical questions about the security framework and how it might have been compromised. "We're seeing patterns that suggest systematic contract manipulation," she said when we met at a downtown coffee shop. "Payments to shell companies, backdated authorizations, routing through offshore accounts. Your system flagged all of it over the past 18 months. The irony was perfect. Brandon had fired me for refusing to compromise the system's integrity. Now that same integrity was exposing his crimes. Within 2 weeks, federal agents were executing search warrants at Apex's offices. Computers seized, files impounded, executives lawyering up. The $1.1 billion merger became the least of Brandon's problems as money laundering and fraud charges materialized. Mike was in the kitchen doing calculus homework when I accepted Pinnacle's offer. The kid looked up from his textbook when I hung up the phone. "Good news?" he asked. "Very good news, son. Looks like your MIT tuition just got a lot easier to handle." His grin was worth everything I'd been through. 4 months earlier, I'd been worried about paying for his education. Now I was looking at a salary that would cover tuition, eliminate the mortgage, and maybe even let me think about retiring comfortably. "Dad, you're actually smiling," Mike said. "I haven't seen you do that since Mom died." That hit me harder than I expected. Sarah had always told me, "Ed, your integrity is the one thing nobody can take from you unless you give it away." During her cancer fight, she never complained, never compromised her principles even when the insurance company tried to deny coverage. She'd fought for what was right until the very end. Sitting in my kitchen, unemployed but with my principles intact, I could almost hear her saying, "I'm proud of you for not backing down." That's when I knew I'd made the right choice, even if it cost me everything. Maybe getting fired was the push I needed to remember what actually mattered. 6 months later, Brandon was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison for money laundering and defense contract fraud. Apex Technologies filed for bankruptcy. Tony Rodriguez landed on his feet. I'd recommended him to Pinnacle's security team. Mike started his freshman year at MIT that fall, debt-free and proud of his old man. The house was paid off by Christmas. And for the first time since Sarah died, I was thinking about the future instead of just surviving. You know what I learned? At 52, getting fired isn't the end of your career. Sometimes it's the beginning of the one you should have had all along. Sometimes the best revenge is simply building something so solid that the truth has no choice but to rise to the surface.